A democracy that's strong, fair, and true depends on you. Introducing onAir, a nonprofit, nonpartisan digital democracy network. It's a hub that connects citizens with their government and with the candidates, the issues, and each other.
Good afternoon. I'm Connor Oatman, and I will be your host for today's US onAir Aircast. Our sponsor today is Democracy on Air, a nonpartisan nonprofit that supports the US onAir network of 50 governance and election hubs at us.onair.cc. Our Aircast today will focus on gerrymandering. For some background on this issue, here is a short video.
Gerrymandering refers...
So, you want to know what gerrymandering is? First, let's start with Government 101. In the United States, each state elects a certain number of representatives based on the state's population. The larger your population, the more representatives you have. Each representative represents a district, or a geographical area including its voters. Ideally, we want to have a range of representatives who reflect the political views of the population across the state. But how do we decide who gets to vote for each representative? Let's look at an example. Suppose we have a very tiny state of 50 people. 30 of them belong to the blue party and 20 belong to the red party. And just our luck, they all live in a nice even grid with blues on one side of the state and reds on the other. Now, let's say we need to divide the state into 5 districts. Each district will send one representative to the House to represent the people. Fortunately, because our citizens live in a neatly ordered grid, it's easy to draw 5 lengthy districts, 2 for the reds and 3 for the blues. Voila! Perfectly proportional representation, just as the founders intended. Now, let's say instead that the blue party controls the state government, and they get to decide how the lines are drawn. Rather than draw districts horizontally, they draw them vertically, so that in each district there are 6 blues and 4 reds. With a comfortable blue majority in the state, each district elects a blue candidate to the House. The blues win 5 seats, and the reds don't get a single one. Oh well. Finally, what if the red party controls the state government? The reds know they're at a numerical disadvantage, but with some creative boundary drawing, they can slice the blue population up such that they only get a majority in 2 districts. So despite making up 40% of the population, the reds win 60% of the seats. Not bad. This process of redrawing district lines to give an advantage to one party over another is called gerrymandering, and it's nothing new.
Here is Eve Armstrong with a 1-minute speak up video on our topic of gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering refers to the manipulation of boundaries of voting districts to unfairly benefit a particular political party or socioeconomic class. Recently, partisan gerrymandering is at an all-time high, essentially allowing for stolen elections and silenced votes. My Congressman, Don Beyer, is in support of the Fair Representation Act, which, in addition to ranked choice voting, consists of new requirements for congressional redistricting. In short, this would revitalize our democracy by allowing elections to more accurately reflect the demographics of each district. At US onAir, we'd like to give you the opportunity to address your congressperson for more information on taking down gerrymandering tactics and other ways we can make our democracy work for everyone.
To help us understand more about our topic of gerrymandering, we have invited Paul Sullivan, who is the current director of Ohio onAir. Thank you for being with us, Paul.
Of course, nice to be here.
So, with the increasing amounts of gerrymandering that we're seeing across the country, how do you think this is going to affect the upcoming election cycle?
Unfortunately, having gerrymandering is just another issue in terms of the electoral process, which the United States needs to just get over and have a process to have. In terms of every 10 years, states need to redistrict in order to adjust for population. The problem is that political gerrymandering is still legal under the rules of the Constitution, and I don't think that anyone in the United States finds that to be a reasonable means of having electoral boundaries set.
Thank you. Do you see any avenues for change of this process that any politicians would be willing to jump on board with?
I think it's hard to see politicians really jumping on board with an issue that basically directly impacts their chances of getting elected. because the truth about gerrymandering is that whoever has control over districts basically allows themselves to be elected, and that would basically just kind of hamper their ability to win future elections. Even though it would be better for the system, individually, it's not in their best interest. So it's hard for me to really see it coming through in the short term.
Thank you so much for your insight. We'll now be moving into our discussion panel for today. Our panel today has on it Eve Armstrong, a student majoring in global affairs at George Mason University, as well as Ben Murphy, a student majoring in government and international politics at George Mason University, and our featured guest, Paul Sullivan. Since there is a 20-second delay from our live stream, we ask our YouTube live audience to submit their questions in the chat field as soon as they can. So to you all, I just wanted to ask and get your opinions on gerrymandering itself, whether you think it is an issue that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, and how you think it should go about being addressed.
Right. I definitely think it's an issue that kind of flies under the rug in a lot of like political debates. And like I mentioned in my Speak Up video, part of like the Fair Representation Act would kind of promote like a new way of redistricting, as well as like incorporating what we talked about last week, the ranked choice voting, to kind of like revitalize like our democracy like on like a whole new level, kind of make our votes almost like count the way that they're supposed to.
Yeah, I agree. I usually hold a pretty cynical perspective when it comes to American democracy, where I think that not enough blame is put on American voters for a lot of the outcomes that we see, like incumbents staying in office for 40 years, for instance, would be one of the things I usually am pretty cynical about. But one of the biggest defeaters to that kind of position is the existence of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is obviously, without a doubt, a threat to democracy. And obviously there's been various ways that we've worked towards trying to dismantle the system of gerrymandering we have. I know that one of the ways is like bipartisan committees who work on their own to come up with districts. That is definitely one solution that is implemented in some areas. I know another idea that has been, I believe is being looked into and probably trying to be produced right now, is creating computer algorithms that draw districts on various variables to try and make them as fair as possible. But I think that if we want really accountability from, the citizens of this country, then one of the major things we have to tackle is gerrymandering. I mean, Eve is right, where if we have instances where gerrymandering exists, then people's votes aren't counting how theoretically they should be if it's gerrymandered, against them. And even if it's gerrymandered in their favor, their counts are being amplified more than they really should be. And I think this is one of the most fundamental issues, if we're concerned about democracy, that we should be focusing on.
Yeah,
Paul,
I agree.
Do you have any input?
Of course. I think it's pretty much one of the main issues that delegitimizes U.S. democracy as a whole. And it's my understanding that most congressional districts are actually drawn by state legislatures. And there are some states which have delegated that ability to a separate body, and that's actually quite a good thing. That's actually a really highly praisable thing. The issue is that that's not the vast majority of states, and even where it doesn't it exists, I think what we need is as Ben said, a bipartisan initiative to have politicians have humility and take the necessary steps to lessen their ability to rig their own elections, because it's something that benefits their self-interest, and do something that's better for the country.
Well, that's the key thing, isn't it, though, is how are you going to get any American politician to work against their own self-interest? It's obviously these bipartisan commissions would be great, especially with me myself coming from North Carolina, which is a state that is very heavily gerrymandered and has, I think just before the 2020 elections, had to go through 3 separate district maps that were all shot down by the Supreme Court for being too heavily gerrymandered. So it's obviously a very prevalent issue, but I feel like the issue can't even begin to be addressed until you address the topic of politicians understanding that this is in their own self-interest and they would not want to do anything about it.
I think one of the ways that you address this is make this like a key issue in the forefront of voters' minds. I think as soon as like you draw attention that this is not only like an issue that affects like, you know, merely how like districts are drawn and who is in each district, but who wins and how the nation is won. And then now it's not really democratic. I think you will start to see just how gerrymandering for racial issues was completely thrown off the table roughly 80 years ago. I think you'll see the same effect if you make that a prime issue. I think engagement is going to be one of the key things in terms of getting this thing, boat out into the water and having it float, so to speak.
I just want to say I completely agree with Paul here. I mean, I think this is kind of leading to what I was saying before, is that there needs to be some degree of introspection done by voters to determine that like this is something that's within their best interest. Obviously, politicians act within their own best interest, but at the end of the day, they still need to be considerate of what their constituents want. So not everywhere in the country is gerrymandering obviously an issue. There are certain areas where it's more prevalent than others. But nonetheless, you might still see, representatives who have been in office for, decades who also look to gerrymander. Then the question at that point becomes, where does the blame fall? And I think that citizens really need to be looking at this and understand that while some citizens might not be able to have as much of an effect as other people, it needs to be something on everybody's mind, like Paul was saying. And it's something that we need to work together, like all of us, politicians and citizens alike, to actually resolve this issue.
Thank you so much to all of you for your insight and for your discussion with us today.
Thank you.
That is all, folks, for today's Aircast. Thank you to our participants for all your great comments, and thank you to our live stream audience for watching. You can go to the first post on the us.onair.cc homepage to learn more about today's news, view video and live streams, and comment on this Aircast.